You're probably wondering what's going to make me laugh out of Alabama. Well, pretty much everything. But us, no, we don't have to follow those rules. We're the good guys. Could be worse than being a human Cheeto. You could be a clown that does porn. And whenever they say the word realistic, take a drink, you would probably be dead by the end of the night.
If he's not pissing you off, he's not doing his job. This is the Cynical Centrist Podcast.
Welcome to the Cynical Centrist Podcast, episode number 14, August 28th, 2019. It is the second special of the Cynical Centrist Podcast. Well, technically it's the third special because I did do a review of the Democratic debate and I posted night 1 and night 2 of the Democratic debate from Detroit, I think last month. But however, this is going to be a special where I'm going to revisit a topic that I talked about a couple months ago. Now, for those of you that remember, a couple months ago, I had talked about my pick for president for the 2020 election and the nominee for the Democratic primary, and that pick of mine was Andrew Yang. Now, I had mentioned why I have backed Andrew Yang, and much of that is because of his human-centered capitalism idea. I feel like it's a very revolutionary idea, and I very much would like to see it implemented. And it's something that you don't really hear very much from a lot of candidates, just talking a little bit deeper into it. I really wasn't like super into the UBI, but hey, $1,000 a month. I mean, come on, guys, right? That being said, I also did talk about and explained why I felt like Andrew Yang was the only Democratic nominee who had a 0% chance of winning the nomination, and that included people who are of the lower tier end, people like Marianne Williamson or Kirsten Gillibrand, or even like Wayne Messam. Now, I want to revisit those claims of mine back in June, and I want to talk about how I've changed a little bit from those beliefs over the last couple months and exactly why I feel like that these changes are needed. Now, first off, as of the time of this recording, Andrew Yang has definitely moved up a few spots from a couple months ago. At the time, I believe he was in the top 10, but just barely. He was sitting at like 9th or 10th place with about a 1.0 average. As of right now, he currently is sitting at a 2.5% average, according to Real Clear Politics, and now has sole possession of 6th place, just passing Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke. And if you are taking the most recent polls that have come out in the last couple days, he averages a 3.0, and even in one poll, he is currently sitting at 5th place, passing Pete Buttigieg, which if you had asked me if he would pass Pete Buttigieg 2 months ago, I would have said you're absolutely crazy. Now, 2 months ago, I said that there was a coin flip chance, and actually I said that he was an underdog of that coin flip, but roughly a coin flip chance that he would even make it to the September debates. Now, not only did he not just make the September debates, but Andrew Yang made it with quite some time to spare, actually. I believe that he officially got in around the beginning of August, where he got his 4th poll from a Monmouth poll in Iowa, where he managed to pick up 2%, which in itself was surprising since Andrew Yang was underperforming in Iowa. Matter of fact, of the early states, he was doing best in New Hampshire and Nevada. So that he got 2% in Iowa said something. Especially in a Monmouth poll where he really wasn't performing very well in. Actually, he wasn't performing very well in a lot of the DNC qualified polls until recently. And even then, after he qualified, he did get a lot of ones for a little while, but over the last week, he has been slowly climbing up. He's been picking up 2% nationally. He picked up a 4% in Colorado. He picked up a 4%, I believe it was a Gravis poll, nationally. But he did get a 4% national, and he got 2 threes as of this morning, and I'm recording August 28th. As of this morning, he got 2 3%, according to USA Today and Quinnipiac. Needless to say, this actually is very surprising, considering that Andrew Yang is an outsider candidate, and that the mainstream media does not like him very much. And we're going to get to that too a little bit about my claims regarding the mainstream media and the liberal media and what I thought the Democratic base was going to be like towards Andrew Yang. But I will say that Andrew Yang has exceeded all of my expectations up to this point. I did not expect him to even be still in the race. I did not even expect him to be in the September debates, much less people starting to say that he has a slim chance, albeit it is slim, but a slim chance to be president. And now, after looking at the numbers, looking at how people are responding to Andrew Yang, let me just give you an example, actually. In a poll back in April, they talked about favorability and unfavorability. And I believe this was Emerson. And at the time, Andrew Yang had a -4 net favorability rating. 9% liking him and 13% disliking him. Fast forward to a couple of days ago with this new Emerson poll, and lo and behold, he now is sitting at 24% liking him and 12% disliking him. Matter of fact, looking at the two polls, I believe Andrew Yang is the only candidate whose disapproval rating actually went down, which is kind of shocking to me. Now, the reason why I'm saying that this is so shocking, and you're probably thinking, well, everyone else's went up, it's because, especially amongst the lower tier candidates, a lot of people didn't even know who a lot of these candidates are. Marianne Williamson, John Delaney, Seth Moulton, who just recently dropped out, by the way. There's a lot of them. John Hickenlooper, for example. And there are a lot of people who can't make an opinion out of these people, and they can't really approve or disapprove because they've never heard of these candidates before. And Andrew Yang was one of those people whom people either, didn't really have much an opinion of and didn't quite know what to think of him. And now, as more people are starting to get to know him, my original thought was that the like-dislike proportion would continue to be that way, and the progressive base will eventually screw him over. He won't be able to pick up too many votes, and he will eventually drop out. However, something really amazing happened with the Emerson poll. And if you look at it from the April one to the one that was here, all right, not only did anyone who started hearing about Andrew Yang, like almost none of them disapprove of him, like every single one of them either liked him or have no opinion of him. But he also got a small amount of people who disliked him to either start warming up to him and liking him or just not have much of an opinion of him anyway. And that is huge. I don't think you realize just how much of a game changer that is. And especially thinking about how the Democratic base was, and me thinking that the far left base was going to dominate this Democratic debate and the Democratic primaries, just that Andrew Yang is starting to get these people to warm up to him, and including in the Quinnipiac poll, for example, as well, how a lot of somewhat liberals and moderate and conservatives are starting to warm up to Andrew Yang as well. There is a real crowd there, a real broad crowd for someone like Andrew Yang to come in and just take over. And you're actually starting to see that. I'm actually starting to see that. 2 months ago, I thought to myself, there is no way in hell that Andrew Yang is going to be able to pick up enough people to win a primary or to even win any delegates. Now, if you ask me, there's still a chance that it can flop, and more likely than not, it'll still flop. But I'm starting to see that there's a real crowd for ideas like Andrew Yang's. And a lot of people look at his ideas and think to themselves, it makes sense. I'm going to get a little bit personal here, and since I'm anonymous, it doesn't really matter too much, but I'm going to get a little bit personal and talk about my own family. Now, my family, and my parents especially, have voted Republican in every single election since 1980, and that includes presidential and midterm. So from Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter all the way to today, 40 years, they have voted straight ticket Republican. They have never voted for a Democrat, as far as I can remember. And even as far as I was born as well. However, they are so disenchanted with Donald Trump. And by the way, they also were evangelical Christians for 30 plus years as well. And they just recently now just call themselves regular Christians as of 2017. But they've been so disenchanted with Donald Trump and the way that he acts. Now, they agree with him on some issues like China tariffs and illegal immigration. But they are so disenchanted with the way that he acts and his decorum as president, and that he screwed up on the healthcare thing, as my parents have kind of shifted to the left on healthcare, that they were open to a Democrat for president. The problem was a lot of the Democrat nominees were either ineffective or their plans were very ineffective. They were very skin deep and very much a vanity project, Biden, or they were just like, they were for just getting rid of capitalism entirely, and they just were not for getting rid of capitalism entirely, except for one person. And that one person was Andrew Yang. Now, they're not a fan of welfare. However, they do prefer the freedom dividend over other ideas, because $1,000 a month for everybody helps everybody out, and not just a specific part of people. So, not just poor people, not just rich people, not just people who've spent $200,000 on student loans, and so on and so forth. There were a few other things, too, that they had liked about him, but as far as, like, the main flagship proposal, like, if they had to go for some kind of welfare, they're not big fans of corporate welfare, which is what we're having right now under Trump, and they're not very big fans of welfare for just a specific type of people. So if you're going to give welfare, as my parents would say, then might as well give welfare to everybody. So they're fine with Yang's idea on that. Better that than, they would prefer nothing. I mean, they are, after all, strong, lifelong conservatives. But if you're going to give welfare, better to give everybody equal take at it, rather than just a specific type of people. And I get that. And I'm pretty sure that there are a good amount of moderates and conservatives that think about that and think to themselves, yeah, actually, this isn't a bad idea at all. And especially since automation is coming. And especially in places like Las Vegas, where they're planning to replace all the blackjack dealers in the casinos within the next 5 years. Places like that. They're going to need some kind of safety net, or the economy is going to be in serious trouble. And yes, I know Bernie Sanders has the federal job guarantee idea, but the federal job guarantee is going to require even more money than the UBI, especially with how many jobs are going to be lost. And also, there's no real guarantee that he's going to have something for everybody that loses their job to do. And even if he did, robots and automation is going to do it faster. So the government is just going to be a slower version of other corporations and continue to fall further and further behind in progress. Now, take that as you may. The federal job guarantee, like I said, I think Bernie Sanders means well. All right. I don't want to diss Bernie Sanders. I do think that he really thought this through. I saw him on the Joe Rogan podcast. I saw him on his interview with Crystal Ball on the Hill. And I do think that he's a good man, and he means well. He's not my type. Obviously, he's too far left for me. But I think he means well. He's an honest person. And if it came down to him and Trump, I will gladly vote for Bernie Sanders. That being said, is he the best candidate? No. My pick is Andrew Yang. Do I think that Bernie Sanders is the best candidate to bring in people from the other side, to bring in independents? No. That candidate is Andrew Yang. And even 2 months ago, I said that if it came down to Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump in the general election, worst case scenario, and I even put up the worst case scenario on the podcast, Andrew Yang would still win. I feel like, and this is just my opinion, he also has the best chance to get those conservative, independent-thinking states like Georgia, like Montana, like Alaska. I do think that he has a really good chance of getting those states. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to win those states. Don't get me wrong. But he can definitely weaken a lot of red states, especially against Donald Trump. And you could see that in something like Georgia, in something like Montana, or in something like Alaska. Like, I'm giving those three states as examples because they've been known to kind of break the mold a little bit from the other red states. They're not always the fall in line kind of states. I mean, in the past, libertarians have had some success in Georgia. Alaska especially is a very special place where they even wrote in a candidate into a major office at one time, an independent, which was amazing in and of itself. And Montana as well. Montana also has very libertarian, independent roots as well. So you could see Andrew Yang taking those states, even though he might not fare as well in your traditional swing states like Florida and Ohio, though I still think Andrew Yang does win most of the Midwest. Now, I'm going to talk about the other two big issues that I had with Andrew Yang's campaign and my thoughts on them now. And the first big issue was me talking about how his campaign seems to be too broad and he's not focusing on the far left. And I was going on based on information that the major base of the Democratic Party was going to be a far left base, a far left social justice warrior kind of base. And Andrew Yang is not a big fan of identity politics. Matter of fact, he doesn't want to run his campaign on identity politics and has stated so on Twitter. And even I had replied when he had said that he didn't want to talk about identity politics, that I felt like it was a losing strategy, especially with the base being so far left as they were. Needless to say, I am going to have to admit that I had greatly miscalculated the number of people that I thought were disenchanted, at least on the Democrat side, with identity politics, with social justice, or with the more social justice side of the progressive movement. I had not realized that there were a lot of people that were more into the economy and were more into healthcare than they were about culture wars or identity politics. And I will say that I'm very glad that I was wrong in that aspect. I'm actually very surprised that he's been able to build up a coalition of people who are absolutely sick of that kind of thinking and want to think about the bottom line. And the bottom line is that money. Now, granted, there's a lot of people who are voting for Andrew Yang just because, they don't want to work and they just want the $1,000 a month. But there are a good number of people who look into his ideas like I do, with human-centered capitalism, with Medicare for all, with his gun control plan, with his climate change plan that came out this week. Oh my goodness, his climate change plan has really changed the game for how people are looking at climate change. And in my opinion, if you want to know what my opinion is on it, if I haven't spoiled it for you already, it is that I do feel like even though the Green New Deal is a very ambitious plan, and it's to make zero net emissions by 2030, I feel like it uses up way too much resources and could severely damage our economy if we try to go headfirst into it. It would work to go by 2030 if you threw all of your resources into that. Like if you put in trillions upon trillions of dollars. With Yang's plan, he has a little bit of regulation and a little bit of technology. He wants to push for thorium reactors. And I know there's a lot of older voters thinking to themselves, ooh, nuclear power, that's scary, it can cause a meltdown. This isn't uranium nuclear power. This is thorium nuclear power. And if you go and look up thorium on YouTube and look up thorium reactors, you will see how a thorium reactor works. And actually, there was this one YouTube channel, Salmonella Academy. Yeah, Salmonella, get it? Salmonella Academy. That actually talks about the differences between uranium and thorium, and why thorium is more stable and requires a lot less of a more active material like plutonium, and he gives that as an example, actually, something like plutonium in order to get it to work, but by itself, thorium is basically pretty harmless. Not to mention that Andrew Yang also had a set goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, which, by the way, is the exact same goal that Germany and the Netherlands have. Just letting you know, I know Germany for sure wants to be a net zero emissions country by 2050. So he's following in the same, timeline path as Germany. And Germany is further along than we are. Think about that for a second. So even by those standards, Yang's plan is still very ambitious. But is it going to break the bank? There's less of a chance of it breaking the bank than the Green New Deal is. But here's the problem. Because once the Green New Deal came out, for those who were, for wanting to do something regarding climate change, it was the only option. Trying to say, this is a little bit too ambitious, this is a little bit, not realistic enough. Well, you just get shot down and people will say, well, this is feasible, this is gospel, you follow this, or you just hate the environment or something like that. And it's nice that we finally have a plan like Andrew Yang's, which is a more reasonable, realistic, and detailed alternative to the Green New Deal. And I fully would back, and even though I'm not 100% on board with Yang's plan either, I fully would back Andrew Yang's plan over the Green New Deal. And I feel like it is a more realistic option. But that's just my opinion. If you're for the Green New Deal, you're for the Green New Deal. If you're for Yang's idea, that's cool too. That I'm just telling you what I think. I'm thinking in the mind of somebody who also has the economy and the people in mind as well as our deficit. And how are we going to deal with that? That is the ideas that I am thinking of. And yes, I did say in a podcast earlier that I can understand why progressives want to go far, far left. But if they go too far to the left, they're going to scare some independents. They should go left. Absolutely. Democrats should go left to win this election. And then they can compromise their way back to the center. They shouldn't start from the center and compromise their way to favor the Republicans anymore. They should start from the left. That's true. But in many cases, a lot of these ideas that Bernie has, that Warren has, and even those that think that Bernie and Warren are too far to the right for them, that you see on Twitter all the time, these people don't realize that a lot of their plans are just very unrealistic and they're going to be laughed at when they go into Congress. So you're going to have to be, it's what I call realistically to the left, I should say. Start from a realistically to the left point. And so because of that, I do back Andrew Yang's plan for that reason. And just the fact that he has been broadening out, and at first I thought this was going to be a problem, but clearly I was wrong because there is an audience there. And he has helped me see that there is an audience within the Democrats that are a little bit more centrist, but don't like your Bidens or your Delaney's and think that they're ineffective. They want a more effective radical centrist candidate. They want a centrist progressive candidate. And that is where Andrew Yang comes in. I'm not saying Andrew Yang is a centrist candidate, but just the fact that he is able to not only sell progressive ideas to conservatives, which now I see more as a positive than a negative, and apparently there are people that are starting to see it as more of a positive than a negative, while at the same time able to still pick up a lot of the Democratic base, is a testament to you can't peg Andrew Yang's ideas into a left-right political spectrum. You just can't do it. There are some cases where Andrew Yang is probably the most or the second most progressive candidate in the field. There are some cases where he is more of a centrist candidate, and yet there are some cases where he seems to act more like a Republican than a Democrat. But in reality, you can't peg his ideas onto that left-right spectrum. He is a different animal entirely. And that is what makes him, I feel like anyways, a candidate for a big tent party. And to me, the best chance to beat Donald Trump, especially in some states that are leaning red, but could turn blue if you show them how Andrew Yang thinks and how these ideas can help benefit them. Now, the second big issue that I had mentioned is that the mainstream media would never allow an Asian man to be the Democratic nominee. And do I still believe that? Now, at first, I had based that off of the 2016 election and experiences that I had been seeing from other, secondhand from other Asians as well during the Hillary Trump general election. And there were a lot of social justice warriors who were not very fond of Asian males at the time. And so because of that, I based on when I first saw Andrew Yang, and I actually first saw Andrew Yang, by the way, I think the day or the day after he announced his campaign way back in 2017. And my first thought after that, and remember, this was just fresh out of, like a year fresh out of the Hillary Trump election and having to deal with all that identity politics BS that we were dealing with at the time. My first thought was, he's an Asian man. He can't win. That was my first thought. It didn't matter that he was going to give everyone $1,000 a month, which at the time I thought was not a very good idea either. But I said, he's an Asian man. He can't win. It's just not going to happen. And I continued thinking that the electorate, at least the Democratic electorate, just did not have, I was very much into listening to other podcasts and them talking about how there's this subtle secret racism among some Democrats. And maybe for some Democrats, a few of them, this is true. However, in a broad scale, do I still think that the Democrats and the mainstream media will not allow an Asian man to be the nominee? I would have to say maybe. I'm not 100% fully convinced that the mainstream media is not has some kind of subtle form of racism or doesn't have some form of subtle racism against Asian men. However, I have noticed that the people that have been keeping him out of graphics or keeping him out of things, like, for example, the CNN not showing him on a graphic this morning, but showing Beto O'Rourke. But CNN has not had that same history that places like MSNBC has, or Hollywood, or elsewhere. It's when you realize that they're being biased against Andrew Yang, not because he's Asian, but it definitely feels like it's because he's an outsider. I mean, they don't give Marianne Williamson the same kind of love, and that's a little bit scary as well. And Marianne Williamson is also an outsider. They had really kind of quieted up on a Nevada poll where Tom Steyer got 6%, a New Hampshire poll where, again, Steyer got 4%. These particular polls, when it comes to outsiders, the mainstream media just doesn't seem to like outsiders very much. So while I'm not fully convinced that they're not subtly racist, I cannot be convinced that they are anymore. It seems more of a convincing argument to me that Andrew Yang is an outsider candidate, and they really want someone who is an establishment candidate to win. However, like the 2016 election with Bernie Sanders, like the 2012 election with Ron Paul, the reason why they don't like outsider candidates is because they are too afraid that they will shake up the system too much. And the mainstream media, especially, and the establishment, really like their place at the top. And someone like Andrew Yang could change that. Now, they're giving Bernie Sanders a lot of attention, but they don't really have much of a choice but to give him that attention because he's been consistently second place since the start of the election. A matter of fact, he was the leader until Joe Biden came around. So unless Andrew Yang gets to double-digit percents and it gets to a point where they can't ignore him anymore, what are they going to do? They're going to push their establishment candidates. Who are their establishment candidates? Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke. Even though Beto is flopping like a fish right now, they still have him at 1%. Let's ignore Kirsten Gillibrand. Let's ignore Steve Bullock. Let's ignore Marianne Williamson, Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard, who also got 1%, by the way, in that Quinnipiac poll. And let's especially ignore Andrew Yang, who got 3% in that poll, 2 points ahead of Beto O'Rourke. And it's all because, and like I said, I'm starting to get more convinced of this, that it is because Andrew Yang is an outsider and they don't want to give any real love to an outsider candidate if they can help it. They are always going to stack the deck against the establishment, and that does make a little bit more sense. Now, again, does this mean that, there isn't a subtle racism there against Asians? I think it depends on the person. It depends on the type of person it is. But is it broad? Is it as broad as I thought from my first special regarding Andrew Yang? No, I don't think it is. And I'm feeling a little bit better about that, and it has given me a little bit more confidence to say, and this is going to be a bit of a conclusion. I'm going now to a conclusion here since we're at the 30-minute mark. This is now where I can finally say that, do I think Andrew Yang still has a 0% chance to win the primary? No, I don't. I think that he does have a chance to win. Now, his chance is slim. All right, let's not beat around the bush here. His chances of winning are still somewhere around the less than 1% to about 1% range. They're rising, for sure, especially since he is now polling at 2 to 4%, and he's only continuing to go up. It helps that he is great with debates, and that he's going to have a chance now to be on the September debates with all 10 candidates on one stage. Now, granted, he's going to be one of the lower tier candidates. That's true on that stage. He's going to be like 7th or 8th. However, remember that Andrew Yang also knows how to stand out in a crowd. His views also stand out in a crowd. And this could be his chance to finally get as many eyes as he possibly can watching this ABC debate. And don't forget, he also has one more chance in October as well. So he's got 2 more chances to impress and get to. Now, my opinion, the Democrat National Committee is going to set a cutoff for 5% starting the winter debates. So do I think he can get to 5%? Again, if he plays his cards right, if the Yang Gang has a great ground game, I could see him getting to 5%. I could see him even getting, passing Pete Buttigieg and even Kamala Harris and getting into a top 4. It seems like there is a Democrat crowd out there. There is a crowd for the Democrats who really want a candidate like Andrew Yang, who you cannot put in a box, who really wants to help out everybody and not just a specific group of people. And there's a real crowd out there that if you tap enough of them, especially the youth, especially millennials, and they go out and vote, anything can happen. We could very well see Andrew Yang versus Donald Trump. And I will say this. If Andrew Yang is the Democratic nominee, I can't believe I'm saying this, guys. I can't believe I'm saying this. If Andrew Yang is the Democratic nominee, I will be super happy. I will be like cheering. I'll do an entire episode dedicated to Andrew Yang's policies and why I think that he is the person to beat Donald Trump. And in my opinion, I do think Andrew Yang has the best chance of beating Donald Trump. Yes, the polls do not show it, but much of that reason is because I can't say most, but a good number of Democrats, I'd say about 40%, 45% of Democrats still don't quite know who Andrew Yang is yet. But they will if he continues to rise in the polls. And like I said before, I had assumed that because he had a higher disapproval rating, that he was going to flounder and people will eventually just kind of cool down on his ideas. I was wrong. As more people got to know him, more people like him. And if that trend continues, like I said, anything can happen. Can Andrew Yang win the Democratic primary? I would have said no up until about a couple weeks ago even. But now, I can say never say never. Yeah, he still has a very, very slim chance to win. And we'll probably revisit this after the October debates as well. But does he have a chance now? Yeah. Yeah, he does. And before I go, I forget to mention, too, his endorsements as well. He also has been endorsed by, I believe, Twitter CEO. At least he's one of his donors. And as well as Elon Musk came out on Twitter as well to support Andrew Yang. And there's a couple others too. Tommy Chong also backed Andrew Yang during his phase where he was talking about he wanted to legalize marijuana. That was also pretty cool. So, I mean, the people are starting to come in. And there is a real chance now. And like I said, very slim, but there's a real chance that Andrew Yang can be the Democratic nominee. And there was no way I could have said this even, a few weeks ago. But after looking at the numbers, after looking at how he has exceeded my expectations, taken what I thought was a coin flip chance to make it to September, and made it look easy, no less, and also polling 4 or 5% in some states, and even got his first 4% nationally ever, it's time to really start looking at the thin or slim possibility of Andrew Yang going one-on-one with Donald Trump. All right, everyone, that is the show. That's the special. We're going to continue and talk about the rest of the candidates and how the bubble watch goes down on Saturday. We're going to talk about that. And also, I have Chicken Mania as well. I actually tried a chicken sandwich at Wendy's and KFC, and I'll be talking about that as well. So, if you want to talk more about this, at Cynical Centrist, go check me out on Twitter. Go check me out on the Discord as well. I will leave a link to the Discord as well. I will probably put it on Twitter somewhere later today. And that's pretty much it. And this will go up on Podbean and YouTube roughly at around the same time. I know episode 12 and 13 are not on YouTube, but I will have those up sometime this weekend. So until then, remember, if I'm not pissing you off, I'm not doing my job. See you Saturday.